It's time now for one more thing. I'm going to go first. So there was a story over the weekend about the Syria strikes. Nikki Haley, the ambassador to the UN, went on the Sunday shows and talked about additional Russian sanctions. Take a listen.
You will see that Russian sanctions will be coming down. Secretary Mnuchin will be announcing those on Monday, if he hasn't already, and they will go directly to any sort of companies that were dealing with equipment related to Assad and chemical weapons use.
Those sanctions were not announced Monday. There was reports from the Washington Post that they were pulled back. Larry Kudlow, the president's new economic advisor, said this morning about Nikki Haley.
Ahead of the curve. She's done a great job. She's a very effective ambassador. There might have been some momentary confusion about that. But if you talk to Steve Mnuchin at Treasury and so forth, he will tell you the same thing. They're in charge of this. We have had sanctions. Additional sanctions are under consideration. But
in the last half hour, I was able to get in touch with Nikki Haley, and she said, quote, "With all due respect, I don't get confused." So there is some clarity, at least from her part, on that tonight. Over to you, Juan.
All right. Wow. Okay.
Thank you for that reporting, Dana.
Thank you.
Last night, you know me, I'm watching my favorite baseball team, the Washington Nationals versus the New York Mets. Up to bat comes Bryce Harper. Watch what happened. Take a look at this.
And Lobatone setting up inside. The barrel of the bat flew all the way to the screen, and look at this! See you later on a broken bat.
And that's what happened. He hit a home run with a broken bat. According to the major leagues, it's only happened one other time in all baseball history. That was done by Barry Bonds. So I can tell you as an old player,
cool.
Every time I broke a bat, the ball went nowhere. If the bat didn't break, I think Harper's ball would still be flying.
He should be tested.
What
Greg, you're next.
right?
Such a violent sport.
And
Breaking bats.
Breaking Bad.
Greg's, they're only trying to trick us into thinking they're harmless, but they are days away from killing us. News. All right, let's go to this video of these robots playing soccer. Now, they're going to look really, really incompetent. I believe this is in a China Open. They keep falling over. They're stupid. They're lame. They appear to be drunk, much like me on a Friday night. However, they're only looking clumsy and incompetent because it's an act to trick us into thinking they're not going to take over the world, which they are.
All right, KG.
Okay, so I had the pleasure of attending the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children annual spring luncheon. I'm a member of the Children's Council, former child abuse and sexual abuse prosecutor. I'm also pictured with Mary Polito. She is the fearless leader of the organization, and also the Olympic champion gymnast Michaela Maroney spoke today and was incredibly inspirational. You recall that she's the 2012 Olympian who testified bravely against Larry Nassar for the abuse that she received at his hands. It was very touching, and just to let you know, just a couple of facts, 1 out of 6 boys before the age of 18 will be sexually abused, and 1 out of 4 little girls. So let's make sure that we do something about this, and there's a New York state law, in fact, to make it mandatory reporting in private schools for sexual abuse.
Jesse, I will give you double One More Thing time tomorrow.
Okay.
Special report is up next. Hey, Bret.
Dana reporting in One More Thing. Thank you very much. This is a Fox News alert. I'm Bret Baier. President Trump is meeting tonight with his Japanese counterpart, talking with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe about North Korea and trade, and making news today. But first, one passenger of a Southwest flight is dead tonight, almost sucked out of a window after an apparent engine explosion. The flight from New York to Dallas made an emergency landing in Philadelphia today after the mid-air incident. Now, we have new audio from the control tower talking with one of the pilots of that Southwest flight.
Could you have the medical meet us there on the runway as well? We've got injured passengers. They said there was a hole and someone went out.
Someone went out. Getting details. At this hour, we're waiting for Southwest Airlines CEO to make a statement. You're looking at that live coming from Dallas. We'll bring you that as soon as it begins. But first, correspondent Julie Banderas has the latest on this incident. Good evening, Julie.
Yeah, what a horrifying story, Bret. This all started after the crew apparently reported damage to one of the aircraft's engines, the fuselage, and a window, and that passenger you just heard with air traffic control. Now, the FAA says that this emergency landing on Flight 1380 happened at 11:20 this morning. Passengers are seen exiting the plane using those air stairs. But before this, a harrowing rescue in midair. Witnesses say when a piece of shrapnel from the engine that blew out a window, a female passenger was partially sucked out of that window hole before her fellow flyers scrambled to her rescue. Listen to one passenger describe his horror story.
Totally surreal. My wife is in her 3rd trimester with our first child, so I spent a lot of my time trying to articulate what I wanted my final words to be to my unborn child, to my wife, to my parents.
Some other passengers have been sharing their harrowing stories on social media, such as Marty Martinez, who even briefly went live on Facebook while wearing an oxygen mask. In his post, he wrote, "Engine exploded in the air and blew open window 3 seats away from me." He says the explosion injured a female sitting in the seat next to the window. The deceased passenger has been identified as Jennifer Riordan from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And more disturbing news. This exact same thing, Bret, happened in 2016. Aviation experts telling me same engine, same airline, and same damage, short of a window puncture. Take a look at this photo of the engine aboard a Southwest flight in 2016 compared to the one that failed today. This engine is a GE CFM 56 7B22 engine. It's made by CFM International Inc. What occurred is an uncontained fan failure, or throwing a fan blade, as it's called by the experts, which, by the way, is a rare occurrence, but experts tell me it does happen on occasion, and it happened today. Now, the flight was carrying 143 passengers and 5 crew members. The pilots, crew, and passengers all worked together to survive this horrific flight. Bret.
Amazing story. Julie, thank you. Again, we're waiting for the CEO of Southwest Airlines, Gary Kelly, speaking shortly in Dallas. Has not started as of yet, as you can see there, about this incident today. We'll turn that around when we get it. But there's much more news today to tell you about. The talk was warm, but tensions remain as President Trump welcomes Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to his Mar-a-Lago estate today amid concerns over trade and North Korea. The meeting between the two leaders came as word that North and South Korea are working to formally end a state of war that has lasted more than 60 years. President Trump trying to reassure his ally about his upcoming meeting, the meeting between himself and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, by downplaying what could be a very historic event. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts reports on the summit from Florida.
President Trump today welcoming Japan's Prime Minister to Mar-a-Lago for the 2nd time. The two are friends and may play golf tomorrow morning, but these talks could be contentious at times.
We're going to be discussing trade with Japan. We are going to be discussing military. We're going to be discussing security. And we will, I am sure at the outset, we're going to get along, and when it's all over, we're going to get along even better.
Today, word that North and South Korea are working towards signing an official peace agreement to supersede the ceasefire that has been in place for 65 years.
They do have my blessing to discuss the end to the war.
The planned meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is giving Japan heartburn. Shinzo Abe seeking assurances from the president that Japanese interests won't be given short shrift.
For North Korean issue, I'd like to underscore the importance of achieving the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, as well as the abandonment of missile programs of North Korea.
John Wolfenstahl was senior director for arms control and counterproliferation in the Obama White House. He says Abe wants security guarantees in any denuclearization deal.
Abe doesn't want Trump to get a deal that does that, but leaves Japan vulnerable to medium-range missiles and a residual nuclear capability. And so they want to coordinate the positions and make sure Japan's not left out in the cold.
President Trump tried to calm those fears today, saying he will faithfully represent Japan's interests if and when he sits down with Kim.
They do respect us. We are respectful of them, and we're going to see what happens. We will bring up the abductees. We'll bring up many different things. I think it's a time for talking.
But Prime Minister Abe may hear less comforting talk when it comes to trade. President Trump is taking aim at the $69 billion trade deficit the U.S. has with Japan. Chief Economic Advisor Larry Kudlow saying the trade agenda will be comprehensive.
It's going to be about the exclusions from the national security tariffs on steel. It's going to be about market opening initiatives by Japan. It's going to be about TPP will be on the conversation.
Japan wants to see the U.S. back in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but President Trump wants to negotiate a bilateral free trade deal with Japan first. The president tweeting last week that the U.S. already has bilateral deals with 6 of the 11 nations in TPP and are working to make a deal with the biggest of those nations, Japan, who has hit us hard on trade for years.
He's not a big fan of these multilateral agreements. He'd rather go country to country, so-called bilateral, like we're going to talk with Japan tomorrow, or today and tomorrow. So we'll see about this.
Japan is worried that President Trump may link trade and security with a message that if Japan wants security assurances on North Korea, it needs to move on trade. And President Trump also revealed today that the White House has been having direct talks with North Korean officials about setting up that summit with Kim Jong-un, likely in either late May or early June, and that they have narrowed down the location for those talks to 5 possible sites, though no word on what those sites are. President Trump sounding optimistic about the opportunity to sit down with Kim, but at the same time saying, we'll see, maybe not. Bret?
You know, John, a bit of a dust-up, it seems, inside the administration tonight. You had the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, yesterday saying that Russian sanctions, more of them were on the way, possibly as soon as this week. And then you had a response, talking to Dana Perino after Larry Kudlow said she might have been confused. Quote, with all due respect, I don't get confused. Seems like there may be a back and forth happening there.
A little bit of a back and forth there, Bret. We heard from the White House in a statement yesterday that nothing has changed. They're still considering sanctions, but nothing to announce at this time. But for the very first time, an administration official was asked about this in person. Larry Kudlow always tells people what's on his mind, and today he said that Nikki Haley got a little ahead of the curve. There was perhaps a momentary confusion there, which prompted her to give that sharp retort. She apparently, according to Dana Perino, has been trying to get in touch with Kudlow all day. He hasn't been taking her call because he's wrapped up in this Japan bilateral, but she's going to try to get him tonight, and I don't want to be him when she does.
All right. John Roberts, traveling with the president. John, thanks. In a blow to the Trump administration, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled today that part of a federal law that makes it easier to deport immigrants who have been convicted of crimes is too vague to be enforced. The court's 5-4 decision included President Trump's own conservative appointee, Justice Neil Gorsuch, aligning with the 4 liberal justices. President Trump just tweeted moments ago about this case, saying today's court decision means that Congress must close loopholes that block the removal of dangerous criminal aliens, including aggravated felons. This is a public safety crisis that can only be fixed by Congress. House and Senate must quickly pass a legislative fix to ensure violent criminal aliens can be removed from our society. Keep America safe. Just moments ago. Well, your ability to avoid paying sales tax by shopping online is up for debate by the U.S. Supreme Court as well. And a decision from the justices could affect the price you pay by checking out over the internet. Correspondent Garrett Tenney looks at that argument before the court.
The days of paying less for shopping online could be coming to an end. 42 states are locked in a heated battle with some of the internet's biggest retailers over the ability to charge sales taxes. A lot of online retailers don't collect sales taxes, which is in part why items will often cost a bit less than they do at a physical brick and mortar store. That might be great for customers, but for the states, that can add up to billions of dollars in lost tax revenue. South Dakota is leading this charge, asking the high court to overturn its long-standing precedent.
Out-of-state retailers get a price advantage, and all we're asking the Supreme Court is to make the level playing field, and we're asking to treat everybody the same.
During arguments today, the justices appeared reluctant to overturn their prior rulings. Much of the discussion revolved around the burden that small online businesses and startups would face if forced to collect sales taxes. Attorneys for the online retailers argue that burden would be significant, given that there are 12,000 tax jurisdictions in the country, each with their own rates, rules, and holidays. Chief Justice John Roberts seemed to agree with that notion, saying it's not that e-commerce is expanding. The problem you have to address is that the coverage in terms of collecting the taxes is expanding as well. Justice Neil Gorsuch took an opposing view, arguing the court shouldn't be picking winners and losers, saying, why should we this court favor a particular business model that relies not on brick and mortar, but on mail order? The state's counter, small businesses can easily comply with the various taxes by using accounting software. But outside the court, several independent online sellers disagreed.
It is arrogant to say how easy it is to comply with online sales tax. And then you want me to do it in 46 states and with thousands of jurisdictions, and you think you just flip a switch to do that? Good luck, because it doesn't happen that way.
This argument comes amid President Trump's feud with the largest online retailer. And while Amazon is not a party in this case, the ruling could impact third-party sellers on the site who don't collect sales taxes. The justices are expected to issue a decision by the end of June. Bret?
Garrett, thank you. This tax filing deadline day, President Trump says Americans are winning because of tax reform. For more on that and where we're headed next, we turn to Texas Congressman Kevin Brady, chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Mr. Chairman, thanks for being here.
Bret, thanks for having me.
You know, you got over the hump. You got the tax law done. Now it's tax day. Obviously, it's a year before you really see the changes. Your thoughts at how this is shaping up and, you know, the criticism that you all took for getting this passed.
Yeah, so I hate tax day. I think most families do. They hate tax week. The good news is this is the last time Americans will file their taxes under that old, complicated, unfair tax code. Going forward, it'll not just be simpler. Families will keep more of what they earn. Main Street businesses will keep more of what they earn, and we've redesigned it so our U.S. companies can compete and win anywhere in the world, especially here at home. So we're already seeing economic benefits from it. Families now are already seeing higher paychecks because their tax withholding has lowered. So individuals stop and thank us for that. And again, Main Street optimism is at a 30-year high.
All right, and today you saw Speaker Ryan talking about fully intending to make the tax cuts permanent. How is that possible?
Yes, so we made them long-term for families and for small businesses, but because of Senate rules, we're unable to make them permanent. We think one of the provisions in Phase 2 should be to make them permanent, but more than that, we're really trying to change the culture in Washington. Instead of waiting 30 years and falling far behind our competitors worldwide, we think we ought to move aggressively each year to make America more competitive, to make businesses more productive, to encourage more innovation. And we're always looking for ways to make our tax code more family friendly, you know, just helping families stretch their budgets farther. So our goal is every year to make our tax code in our country stronger.
All right, stretching budgets. You have the CBO out with budget deficit projections, and you take a look at the years, $804 billion in 2018, and it trickles up over $1 trillion as you look down to 2028, $1.5 trillion. I'm going to play a soundbite from a guy you know, Representative Kevin Brady.
Excessive federal spending is our disease. Large federal budget deficits and accumulating federal debt are symptoms of this disease. If you cure our spending disease, the symptoms will vanish. If you treat the symptoms, you may temporarily alleviate some of the pain. But over time, our economy will continue to weaken, our international competitiveness will erode, and our children will become the first generation of American history that is poorer than the previous generation.
That was 2011. Still true today?
It is. The CBO report, not reported by very many, is that tax revenues in America actually grew after tax reform. So it's the spending that grew faster. So my point is that we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem, and that's where we need to focus our efforts. I'm convinced we could start with the rescission package of savings cuts that the president's proposing, working with Congress. Secondly, and I think this would be, a major signal to America, the House has already passed a bill
last year with $1 trillion of savings in the first reforms of an entitlement Medicaid in its history. It's sitting in the Senate today, just a couple votes short. We're going to encourage the Senate to move on that bill because we think that takes a significant step forward.
Speaking of the Senate, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was on with Neil Cavuto talking about that rescission effort earlier.
The president, meanwhile, is looking at this $1.3 trillion spending measure, wants to rescind a lot of that spending. Are you okay with it?
Well, he agreed to it. You know, he was involved in the negotiation and signed the bill.
But he warned, I'm never going to do this again.
Yeah, but we had an agreement with the Democrats, and I don't think
so
you
you're
can.
surprised by what he said when he came out and criticized?
You can't make an agreement one month and say, okay, we really didn't mean it, and come back the next month and say, oh, we really didn't mean our agreement.
I mean, that doesn't sound very promising about rescission possibilities.
Look, before recent history, rescissions were pretty common. They happened many years. Congress didn't take all of what presidents proposed, but they took some of them. And I can't think of a more important time for that to happen. And especially today, for example, Congress is moving forward with the first redesign of the IRS in 2 decades, redesigning it, refocusing it on customer service, and reining in the abuses of it. You know, we ought to be looking at tax savings and, on spending savings, I think, every day.
Do you think anything else big, legislatively, is going to happen before the midterms?
So I think the redesign and reining in the IRS is one that could go to the president's desk. I think it's important for us, now that we're armed with one of the best tax codes on the planet, we need more customers. So I think a new modern NAFTA by the end of the year, I think is critically important to the economy. And I think we ought to move on workforce. Look, there's only 2 things holding us back now that we have the new tax code. We need new customers, we need more workers. And that's where we think there are a lot of Americans who are trapped on the sideline in our welfare system. We shouldn't give up on them, and frankly, the country needs them. So I think we can make progress there.
Last thing, as you look to the midterms, you're now at 42 Republicans who are either not running, retiring, Charlie Dent's getting out of office before he was going to finish up his term, the Speaker of the House is not running again. And that's an uphill battle for holding on to the House.
It is an uphill battle. It is historically, and it is this time. But people don't vote in April. They vote in November. And a lot can happen between now and then. And I think, again, back home, I just see a new optimism on Main Street. I see it among our workers, and now we're seeing jobs coming back to the United States and giving us new hope. America's back because of this tax reform. And so at the end of the day, I think voters are going to choose, do they want to go back to this tax code they filed with today, with taking more of what they earned, or do they want a new future for the country?
Mr. Chairman, on this tax day, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Bret.
Defense Secretary James Mattis and Joint Chiefs Chairman Joseph Dunford briefed lawmakers behind closed doors today about the administration's decision to strike Syria. This as the State Department pushed back on reports that inspectors are now in Douma, the site of last week's suspected chemical attack. National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin is following all of this from the Pentagon tonight. Good evening, Jennifer.
Good evening, Bret. The State Department, as you mentioned, pushed back on reports that an international chemical weapons team had reached the site of the alleged chemical weapons attack outside Damascus, adding the delay may have given the Russians more time to tamper with the site.
Our sources, which we consider to be reliable, indicate that the team has not yet been able to enter Douma. So that is our understanding of the situation, at least as of right now.
Defense Secretary Jim Mattis and General Joe Dunford briefed the entire House and Senate in closed-door classified meetings on the Syria strike. Mattis has been restrained in what he has said publicly.
We did what we believed was right under international law, under our own nation's laws, and I hope that this time the Assad regime got the message.
The Pentagon has pushed back on Israeli criticism that the Allies did not destroy all of Assad's chemical weapons sites, adding that was never the goal and would have risked civilian casualties or killing Russians.
I would say there's still a residual element of the Syrian program that's out there. I'm not going to say that they're going to be unable to continue to conduct a chemical attack in the future.
Late last night, Syrian state television announced the country was under attack again, this time at the Shayrat air base outside Homs, where the U.S. launched 59 missiles a year ago. Confusion ensued, showing just how jumpy the Syrian military is right now. Syrian state TV blamed Israel and the U.S. for an electronic attack causing the false alarm. The Pentagon was forced to issue a statement, quote, "There are no U.S. or coalition operations in that area, Homs. We don't have anything additional to provide." Fox News has learned deception did play a key role in the weekend strike. Russian and Syrian radar never saw the missiles coming. What became apparent was despite threats to hit U.S. and allied ships involved in the strike, Russia blinked. Bret?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Next up, President Trump goes on to battle with California's governor over border security and a number of other things. What this deal might be all about. Next. Venezuela's most important industry facing some major upheaval tonight. Reuters reporting that thousands of oil workers are quitting the state-run industry over disagreements with its new military commander, who, according to union leaders, has quickly alienated everyone from the rank and file to several executives at foreign companies operating there, adding to the already severe situation with the economic downfall in Venezuela. We'll continue to cover all the news from that country. Meantime, back in this country, the governor of the Golden State came to Washington today amid his battle with President Trump over what California's National Guard troops will enforce at the Mexican border. Tonight, correspondent Peter Ducey reports on that rift and whether it can be repaired.
California's Governor Jerry Brown, the only Democratic governor of a border state, says he's pretty close to a deal to become the last border state to fulfill President Trump's wish of sending hundreds of National Guardsmen to the border.
The Guard is chomping at the bit, ready to go.
But there's a catch. California's Guardsmen are not going to try to keep nonviolent border crossers out. In D.C. today, Governor Brown stood by the letter he sent to DHS Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen, which says, in part, it will not be a mission to round up women and children or detain people escaping violence and seeking a better life. President Trump, who recently reintroduced Brown's decades-old nickname Moonbeam to the discussion, meant to portray the governor as too liberal, tweeted, "Looks like Jerry Brown and California are not looking for safety and security along their very porous border." The governor shot back that certain statutes are being followed.
Wait a minute. Is trying to stop drug smuggling, human trafficking, and guns going to Mexico to the cartels? That sounds to me like fighting crime.
Brown blames Republicans in Congress and their failure to pass comprehensive immigration reform for adding anxiety to the lives of illegal immigrants who have led otherwise lawful lives for years.
It's just an inflammatory football that very low-life politicians like to exploit.
While inspecting border wall prototypes last month, President Trump lashed out at Brown for his state's sanctuary city policy.
I think the governor's doing a terrible job running the state of California.
Brown, now 80 years old, has 3 presidential campaigns under his belt. Is he positioning himself for a 4th?
I can't think of anything less attractive than a Democratic presidential primary.
Governor Brown admits Democrats are having some identity problems right now, and that looking ahead to 2020, a new leader of the party has not emerged yet. Brown says he's looking, but while he does, he's the one who's got President Trump's attention, at least for today. Bret?
Peter, thank you. The Dow jumped today 214. The S&P 500 was up 29. The Nasdaq finished ahead 125. A good day on the markets. Up next, what you need to know about the recall of some 200 million eggs. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 25 in Oklahoma City, where firefighters are continuing to battle a massive wildfire. The Oklahoma Forestry Services report the Reeve fire in northwestern part of that state has now scorched almost 250,000 acres. Fox 4 in Kansas City, where St. Louis prosecutors are reviewing evidence that Missouri's Attorney General believes could bring another felony charge and possible impeachment for Republican Governor Eric Greitens. Attorney General Josh Hawley announced today that his investigation found evidence that Greitens may have used a charity donor list for political purposes. Greitens calls those allegations and others false. And this is a live look at Philadelphia from Fox 29. 9, our affiliate there. One of the big stories there tonight, a judge ruled today that the jury can hear decade-old testimony from Bill Cosby about giving quaaludes to women before sex. Cosby is on trial on charges he drugged and molested former Temple University basketball administrator Andrea Constand at his home in 2004. The deposition was also included in his first trial, which ended with a hung jury last year. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.
And on behalf of the entire Southwest family, I want to extend my deepest sympathies for the family and the loved ones of the deceased customer. We quickly launched our emergency response program upon learning of this incident. We're sending a GO team to Philadelphia shortly.
Kelly says the investigation is ongoing, but that plane was inspected Sunday. And he said they are trying to figure out exactly what happened. The flight from New York to Dallas was carrying 149 people on board when it had to make an emergency landing, as we reported in Philadelphia. We'll follow that story. Some of America's hardest working men and women are farmers, and they are feeling caught in the middle over President Trump's fight with China on trade. And they're asking the president to rethink his position on the matter before it's too late for them. Correspondent Doug McKelway has part 1 of our series on the fate of American farms.
Douglas Coleman and his employees arrive at one of hundreds of fields they farm throughout Virginia. But the wind means spreading fertilizer will have to wait. Unpredictable weather like this has kept farmers looking up at the sky for centuries. But today they're also looking towards Washington. China has threatened retaliation with the proposed 25% tariff on imported U.S. pork, corn, soybeans, and many other U.S. agricultural exports.
It would put some people out of business, including maybe ourselves. We can't just keep going without nothing.
The looming trade war has rallied farm state lawmakers who see widespread economic damage to rural America if a trade war erupts.
About 1 in 5 jobs are tied to trade, so we really feel the brunt of that in our state.
In anticipation of retaliation, the administration floated a Trump proposal for softening the blow to farmers.
He's asked the Department of Agriculture to protect our farmers, and will present a plan on specifics of that shortly.
But many believe farmers want support not from the government, but from markets.
We need China. China needs us. China is very important to U.S. agriculture, and it is my sincere hope that this situation will be de-escalated.
Last week, farm state lawmakers met with the president, warning him of the damage to agriculture. They came away encouraged. Senator Joni Ernst was one of several who coaxed the president to consider re-engaging in the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
I have long been pushing for TPP, and I see it not just as an advantage for our farmers and ranchers and getting our commodities into those Pacific nations, but I also see it as a matter of national security.
Just days later, the president broached the subject of re-entering an improved TPP, while still believing farmers are willing to make sacrifices if it means fairer trade with China.
They all said, look, we may have to take a little bit of a hit. I don't even think they will.
But there may be some limits to how much of a hit farmers will take. 60% of rural Americans voted for Donald Trump in 2016 in a new election year where some predict Democrats may retake the House. Alienating those rural voters is not a strategy for keeping the House. Bret?
Part 1 of our series. Doug, thank you. More than 200 million eggs are being recalled in 9 states due to fears of bacterial contamination. Tonight, correspondent Jonathan Seri reports on what you need to be aware of with this vast recall.
Federal health officials are investigating a salmonella outbreak linked to eggs.
This particular salmonella outbreak, we have 23 infections in 9 states. There have been 6 hospitalizations, and luckily there have been no deaths reported.
Roseacre Farms, the nation's second largest egg producer, has voluntarily recalled more than 200 million eggs sold under multiple brand names to grocery stores and restaurants in these 9 states. The company explained in a statement some of the reported illnesses were linked to grocery stores where Roseacre Farms does not supply eggs at all. Nevertheless, the company conducted the recall out of an abundance of caution to ensure that we are doing everything possible to preserve the trust that we have built with consumers and their families for many decades.
So this is another large egg outbreak that we're seeing eggs that were sold in many stores across the country in a lot of different brands. We really want people to check the eggs that are in their refrigerator.
Salmonella outbreaks are common in the U.S., causing an estimated 1.2 million illnesses, 23,000 hospitalizations, and 450 deaths each year, although most people recover after several days of fever, cramps, and other gastrointestinal issues without needing to see a doctor. Consumers can reduce the risk of illness by thoroughly cooking meat and eggs and washing hands and countertops that have come in contact with raw or undercooked food. You can find the product codes for the recalled eggs at FDA.gov. In the current outbreak, the eggs in question were distributed from a farm in Hyde County, North Carolina. Rose Acre Farm says this is the first recall for this facility, which has temporarily suspended delivery of shell eggs. In the meantime, the company is filling orders from its other farms around the country. Brett?
Jonathan, thank you. Up next, President Trump tries to calm our Japanese ally amid tensions over trade and North Korea. The panel weighs in next.
Behold, a flock of King's Hawaiian French toast, made with King's Hawaiian sweet rolls, so decadent as they bask in powdered sugar. But alas, predators lurk. New King's Hawaiian French toast combos now in season at IHOP.
Did you know losing 7% of your body weight reduces your...
North Korea, conversations, we'll be having meetings with Kim Jong-un very soon. That'll be taking place probably in early June or a little before that, assuming things go well.
President Trump in Mar-a-Lago meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. They do have a very close relationship. The president going to Japan. It was one of the first leaders, if the first leader, to congratulate President Trump after his election victory. But there are some shaky questions from a Japanese point of view about what is happening with North Korea and also on the issue of trade and these tariffs and what's next. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hilton is a former advisor to British Prime Minister David Cameron and the host of The Next Revolution here on Fox News Channel. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and Jonah Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. You know, Mara, when you listen to this, we're obviously trying to get something, but it is also a little bit of hand-holding for Japan, concerned about what's going to happen with this North Korea meeting.
Concerned about what's going to happen with the North Korea meeting. Japan is worried about medium-range missiles that can hit their country. We're worried about long-range missiles. The other thing Japan is worried about is they're the only remaining ally that has not been given an exemption from those steel tariffs, and that's something that they really want to accomplish in this meeting.
But in part, they're talking about a number of things, including possibly opening up, Steve, TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Yeah, look, I think that the general position that the president seems to have, and I think increasingly his team, is skepticism about these multilateral trade deals. And I share that. And for the reason of democratic accountability, when you do these big deals, the people who end up implementing them, making the rules, invigilating them, are unaccountable international bureaucrats. And I think that's bad. That's a bad outcome. And so generally, I think skepticism is in order. But if they can get back into TPP and bring back some of the accountability, that is strategically good, because the people who will really hate that, the Chinese regime. And that's our really long-term strategic threat, which is China and its stated ambitions to dominate the world militarily and economically. And so anything that strengthens the forces against the Chinese regime, I think, is good.
Because as the U.S. pulled out of the TPP, China moved into some of those relationships and kind of closed the door almost. So let me play this soundbite from Larry Kudlow on the possibility that this gets back in the mix.
It's possible if and only if there are major improvements to the existing TPP. That's the president's key point. He's not a big fan of these multilateral agreements. He'd rather go country to country, so-called bilateral, like we're going to talk with Japan today and tomorrow. So we'll see about this. He wants to take another look at it.
John.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that kind of got lost in the campaign in 2016, both in the primaries and the general, is the fact that TPP was designed to constrain China. And by pulling out of it without any concessions or trade, we actually gave this enormous geopolitical gift to China. And we could, if the White House wanted more protectionism, more tariffs on China, all this kind of that. We could have traded pulling out of TPP for something glorious, but we didn't do that. I was talking to a very prominent international trade lawyer today about all of this. I think it's literally, not literally impossible, but almost impossible to get back into TPP. Because either you have to go back to the thing we pulled out of, which is politically impossible for Trump, because how do you explain why you pulled out of something that you now say is a good deal for you without any changes? And that you
that's the contingency. I mean, you got to get some kind of
you got to get something out of it. But the second you do that with one of these very complicated multilateral things, you have to renegotiate because it is this spider web of connections.
Yeah, it's like pulling a thread out of a sweater.
That Japan and South Korea really want us back in. And when they formed the 11, the mini TPP, the TPP minus the U.S., they merely suspended a lot of the things we wanted. They didn't completely eliminate them. So there's still a possibility. If Trump finally wakes up and decides, wow, I want leverage against China, here's this thing that could give me that, I think that they could get back in.
I want to play this other soundbite about the upcoming meeting with Kim Jong-un. This is, again, the president in Mar-a-Lago.
I look forward to meeting with Kim Jong-un, and hopefully that will be a success. They do respect us. We are respectful of them. We will bring up the abductees. We'll bring up many different things. There's a great chance to solve a world problem. This is not a problem for the United States. It's not a problem for Japan or any other country. It's a problem for the world.
You know, and Steve, I was over in Japan. I interviewed Shinzo Abe. They're concerned that their issues are talked about. The people who have been abducted and held in North Korea. The concern about, as Mara mentioned, mid-range missiles. Do they have right to be concerned about this sit-down, one-on-one?
Yes, but they should be pleased that it's happening, because it's in everyone's interest for the situation to come back from the precipice that it seemed to be on. And so the fact that people are talking, the fact that these already, between the North and South, the fact that these talks are happening, that's all good news for Japan, for the region, and for the whole world. And this meeting today is very helpful because it will put at the front of the president's mind those concerns of Japan, and they'll really be there present when he's thinking about the strategy for the talks and in the talks themselves.
Is there any doubt that the president's unpredictability in how he talks about this has forced where we are today?
No, I think he definitely gets considerable credit for forcing, at the very minimum, these rhetorical concessions, which means something. For North Korea to talk about ending the war, that means something. That's significant. To talk about denuclearization, that is significant. I am still deeply skeptical, not as a criticism of Donald Trump, but as an observation about the North Koreans. They have considered being a nuclear power the central focus of their foreign policy, and they've lied their way to get to it for 2 decades. And the idea that they're going to give that up suddenly without some assurances that they get, that I don't think we could give, I am just very skeptical.
We shall see. Next up, California's governor versus President Trump.
This is something that I'm really passionate about. I really want to help. I was on my way out of this life. There are patients out there that don't have a lot of time. Finally, it was like the sun rose again, and I was going to start fighting back now. When those patients come to me and say, "You saved my life was saved."
Not support moving forward with Governor Brown's sanctuary state.
It's a San Diego County supervisor there. The president tweeting about this issue on sanctuary cities or sanctuary laws. Looks like Jerry Brown and California are not looking for safety and security along their very porous border. He cannot come to terms for the National Guard to patrol and protect the border. The high crime rate will only get higher. Much wanted wall in San Diego already started. That dealing with the National Guard and what they will and won't do. Here are the list of anti-sanctuary cities or counties. And again, San Diego County was just added here, internal division within the state of California on the issue of immigration and how to handle it. We're back with our panel. Steve, you're out there. It's a controversial issue.
Yes, it is. I think there's a context here that we have to remember, which is that the California Democrat, I'm going to say something now which I've said before, but I love saying it, so I'm going to say it again. They've gone so far left, they're halfway to Hawaii. They really have gone in such an extreme left direction that it makes it almost impossible to imagine any kind of cooperation at all. When the National Guard plan was announced, it was actually surprising to me that Jerry Brown offered any kind of cooperation, and he did, and it was a pretty reasonable offer. Then he got grief from his base because they are in love with this image of the California Democrats as the crucible of the resistance against Trump, and so he's walked that back somewhat. And I just think it shows that the politics of California right now mean that you just don't get any credit at all for doing anything vaguely cooperative with this administration.
He was asked about that today. Governor Brown here in D.C. Asked about finding common ground.
Fact is, America has 10 to 11 million people that are here, and they're human beings. They have families. It's very important that they be integrated in a humane, intelligent way. We want to be cooperative. I appreciate the president's tweet when he thanked me. There's been a little bit of back and forth, as you always get with bureaucrats, but I think we can find common understanding here.
I mean, he's just being very specific about what his troops can and cannot do.
Look, Jerry Brown is one of the most experienced, effective politicians right now. I would say he's probably the most effective, and he knows that it's sometimes you cooperate with the president, as he did when he explained what his National Guard troops would do and wouldn't do, and other times he has to acknowledge that in his state this idea of sanctuary is very powerful. I think he's doing a pretty good job of straddling that.
But if you put the question about sanctuary, state, city, county, whatever it is, just to a poll, it does not poll well.
No, it doesn't. And look, I'm a huge proponent of federalism. I give talks about how we need to send power back down to the states. But the actual power over immigration is a federal power. And I find that the sanctuary city laws, while I understand them as a matter of community relations and law enforcement, to be kind of outrageous. And you can understand why that frustration exists there. That said, you know, this is about a dozen people on this list of cities. I looked it up. California has 58 counties and 482 municipalities. So this is, what's interesting to me about this as a political nerd, is how much of this is really concentrated in the old classic Orange County plus conservative rock rib Reagan California, and those guys are still down there and they're still flying the flag, but they're kind of like Japanese soldier on the island after the war.
There's no thought that the president is going to win California if he in re-election, or that they're going to win seats in California.
But any time the president can talk about immigration is a good day for him politically. It's just his go-to issue. It's important. It energizes his base around the country. It sends the message he wants to send.
It helps with fundraising from these very wealthy counties.
This is his touchstone issue.
But remember that the California Republicans are actually, just as elsewhere, very much behind the president. That's my experience of them day to day when I'm there. And so there's no reason to soften the position, because exactly as Jonas said, it's a reasonable one. It's something that is a federal policy and should be run as such.
Panel, thank you. When we come back, a masterclass in avoiding answering a question.
Over. Hey, wanna try it? Okay, here we go. Over.
1, 2.
Hey, whoa, pop. Your shoes are tied.
Ensure he's well taken care of, even as you build your own plans for retirement.